I am going to start this video with a disclaimer. This video expresses my personal views on a hot topic in gaming, Palworld, and is for general information purposes and entertainment. No representations are made, the content is error-free, and everything I say may be completely wrong from a legal perspective, and a different outcome may result from the real-world actions of the parties involved, of which I have no insider knowledge. I am not a lawyer, nor am I trying to act like one. The video contains no legal advice or recommendations advocating for or against any legal action, and it is not my intention for this video to do so. If you want legal advice on the matters I talk about, speak with a lawyer, not me. This video isn't a serious, in-depth legal analysis or a primer and won't go into depth on things like the Sam Spade test or Rogers test, if that's what you're looking for. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on its content are hereby expressly disclaimed. Lastly, before I start, my too long didn't watch is as follows. I don't believe the owners of Pokemon are likely to sue Palworld due to the significant differences in themes, characterization, and gameplay when compared to Pokemon, given, among other things, their history of losing the Fire Emblem and Tearing Saga lawsuit. The only thing that I think might change my personal view is if Palworld toys start being sold in the same toy aisle as Pokemon ones. The purpose of this video is to add my personal opinion to the current debate on Palworld, Pokemon, and copyright and trademark infringement, and how that relates to Fire Emblem by examining the history, a brief history of copyright as it relates to the matters herein. It is not a video meant to attack or deny any of the topics in this video, nor is it meant to criticize those who like or dislike the subjects within. It's just my opinion. You are welcome and encouraged to disagree with it, and I am happy to hear the opinions of the people who watch this video. For background, Palworld is a video game by Pocket Pair, a Japanese company that was released for early access on January 19th, 2024. To my knowledge, it has been in development for 3 years. Palworld is a creature collecting game with farming and survival elements that's come to be known on the internet in the weeks leading to its release and after as essentially being Pokemon with guns. While that alone isn't anything truly controversial in my opinion, the designs of some of the creatures, called Pals, when compared to certain Pokemon designs, has caused some claims of plagiarism, copyright, and trademark infringement to pop up on the internet. Generally speaking, plagiarism is not a crime, it's just unethical. The actual crimes would involve copyright infringement and trademark violation. There's also patent violations, but that isn't really relevant here. The history of copyright infringement is a matter of opinion as well, though one backed by the law. It is ultimately decided by a jury of our peers, a judge, or group of judges. For examples of this divergence of opinion, and to make some long story short, there was a brief point in time back in the 1940s when Captain Marvel, also known as Shazam, before he was owned by DC Comics, was considered to be copyright infringement of Superman before that was reversed by an appeals court. On the trademark side of things, there was a time when a parody dog toy of Jack Daniels was considered not to be infringing before the Supreme Court of the United States overturned that as well. But this matter of opinion is something that comes from an American perspective. How do we attempt to tie that into a Japanese one? Well, this is where Fire Emblem, of all things, come into play. Nintendo famously lost a landmark video game copyright lawsuit in Japan that is considered to be the reason a game like Palworld can even exist. In that lawsuit, the creator of Fire Emblem, Shozo Kaga, was able to somewhat successfully leave Nintendo and create Tearing Saga for the PlayStation, an SRPG that is extremely similar to Fire Emblem. This is a lawsuit that was started before Tearing Saga was even released. Tearing Saga was so similar to Fire Emblem at one point that it took place in the same Fire Emblem universe as it relates to Marth's universe, was called Emblem Saga, and was even going to feature creatures, unique language, and characters from Fire Emblem before eventually being dropped. Despite all the similarities in gameplay, Enterbrain, owners of Tearing Saga, ultimately prevailed in their copyright lawsuit, but as mentioned earlier, were only somewhat successful. Why somewhat? Because they lost an anti-competition lawsuit due to not doing enough to temper the fever of gaming news outlets referring to Tearing Saga as Fire Emblem for PlayStation, in part due to Shozo Kaga's own words, making it seem like Enterbrain was somewhat endorsing the phrasing. With that in mind, let's take a look at Palworld and Pokemon. There's no point in really comparing the gameplay between the two due to the precedent of the Fire Emblem Tearing Saga lawsuit. Even if we did, Using comparisons from some recent American lawsuits involving Tetris, Pokemon games do not feature guns as a primary means of combat, among other differences. If you put two pictures of or videos of Pokemon and Palworld next to each other, you would see that their gameplay is substantially different, even when factoring in something like Legends Arceus into the mix. And on the anti-competition side of things, although people call it Pokemon with guns, Palworld does not advertise itself as Pokemon with guns, nor have we seen a massive effort to call it Pokemon for Xbox and PC. But what about the designs of the pals themselves? The designs in pals themselves is where things start to get more complicated, to the point where opinion truly and undeniably comes into play. The primary thing to look out for is if the designs and characteristics of pals and Palworld would create a level of confusion that would make the average consumer think that they're Pokemon. In this regard, copyright infringement has two aspects to it. The first is if the work in question can even be copyrighted. While that may sound silly, such a test is necessary to prevent stock characters, like a generic wizard, from being subject to copyright, but is also the reason why having a red fox that shoots fire in and of itself can't be copyrighted. There needs to be more so we can determine the difference between, say, Gandalf and Dumbledore, or why you can have karate gi wearing fighters other than Ryu from Street Fighter, like Akira from Virtua Fighter. We will assume that pals and Pokemon pass this first test. The second is the actual infringing standard. This standard is typically referred to as substantial similarities, of which there are many tests that exist to help analyze. One such test involves an understanding of level of access to the infringed material, which would be easy enough to show, as Pokemon is the most successful entertainment franchise in the world and has massive public recognition. Another test is to examine the look and feel, which is fairly self-explanatory. There are certain to be Pokemon fans who feel certain Palworld designs fail this test, as we've seen play out in the public forum. If Palworld models were built directly off of existing Pokemon ones, that would be very likely to be problematic, but to my knowledge, there is no public evidence of this, just speculation. The same could be said if the models were generated using AI, but again, that is speculation as well. There are tests that could be used to examine if code was taken to animate the models, tests that look at the actual feats and personalities of the characters in question, and so on. There are many factors that go into the whole process, and simply trying to do something like comparing looks may not be enough. With all that in mind, what can we conclude? Honestly, we truly can't conclude anything one way or the other. While Japanese courts found Tearing Saga to not be in copyright violation of Fire Emblem, American courts in a slightly similar case took the opposite approach. In the 1970s, McDonald's was sued over having characters for their commercials being too similar to those in a children's puppet show. In that case, an advertising company working with McDonald's had engaged in direct talks with the makers of the puppet show to use their characters for advertisement only to be cancelled. Whereas Enterbrain won their copyright case despite Kaga having been the father of Fire Emblem working directly on Tearing Saga, McDonald's lost theirs because of the cancelled advertisement talks and the fact that the advertisement campaign involved former employees of the puppet show. I doubt Palworld ever engaged in direct talks of any kind with Nintendo, but this is just here to show how different courts place weight on certain factors and how fickle the subject matter can be. I don't think anyone can credibly deny that pals take heavy inspiration from Pokemon, but just like Homelander clearly takes inspiration from Superman, that in and of itself is not enough if enough distinctions exist. Palworld's pals have different personalities, histories, and development in-game. Where Pokemon encourages friendship and working together, Palworld allows for things much darker. Pokemon involves competition between Pokemon and research into them, whereas Palworld involves humans using weapons and pals to simply survive. As mentioned earlier, if you put screenshots or videos of the games next to each other, they're going to come across more different than similar. As mentioned in my Too Long Didn't Watch, the only thing that I think will really change my opinion on this matter is if Palworld ever starts making toys of their products and you start seeing them in the same aisle as Pokemon ones. For those that don't know, Pokemon makes most of its money through merchandising as opposed to their games. A similar looking toy, where you don't see any of the guns or construction aspects, can increase the chance of confusion. And as we mentioned earlier, you want to avoid confusion. If Pocket Pair has not done the heavy due diligence to ensure that their creations aren't distinct enough from something as prolific as Pokemon, then they should be prepared for where the dice may fall. But I just think that, for the most part, they've done enough with the aspects of what can and can't be copyrighted to be safe on this issue. And if the Fire Emblem and Tearing Saga is anything to go by, if Nintendo was going to take action, I imagine we would have heard or seen something by now, but precedent isn't really in their favor if you ask me. There's also the factor of cost present in any lawsuit, especially when the end result would probably just be to change a few designs. But as I said in the beginning, I could be wrong about everything. There could be a lawsuit in planning right now. Only the future can tell us the truth, and this video only scratches the surface of the history and depth of this topic. And with that, I thank anyone who took the time to watch this video, and I hope you learned something from it. I certainly learned a lot in trying to make it.